about the individual goats in the herd? You talked about the kids who are with their does and how they learn from each other, and it's important that they come as pairs. But do you ever have a goat that just is no good for the job? It doesn't like this adventurous work where it has to climb through the thicket, or it isn't thrifty, doesn't maintain its body weight?
There are differences between individuals, that's for sure. I have a couple that have some more dairy blood in them. There's a couple, one's got some La Mancha, and they don't look, they're just naturally skinnier. So I think they're just the way they look. Some people think, oh, it looks like they're really skinny, so they kind of, oh, you're taking care of them. But there's some of those aspects of
concern of the public.
Concern of the public when they say, oh, that's a skinny goat. Well, that's a goat that's just a natural way she looks, because that's the body build of more of a dairy goat versus a meat breed. And here's one of the bottle kids. Come over to visit. So anyway, but yeah, that's the main. Most time, usually the main problems I've had with individuals, I of course depend a lot on electric fences for keeping the goats in.
Right.
And if they don't respect the electric fence or decide to jump my electric fence, that's when I start seriously looking at, culling of animal, because I can't have them teaching the other animals to not respect my fencing.
Sure, jumpers are a problem.
Jumpers are a problem. They get out and they cause, especially in the urban situations, you don't want to can't really have that.
So what about hazards? If your goats jump out, of course there's more to eat. There's all these gardens and things, people's neighborhoods, but what potential problems does that raise for you as the herdsman?
Sure. Well, there's a couple things. One is that there are a lot in western Oregon or Washington, there's a lot of issues with a lot of rhododendrons and azaleas, which are poisonous to goats. So that is a challenge if they do get out and they could eat the wrong plants.
And what happens if a goat eats a rhododendron or camellia?
Well, the challenges with them. It causes them to essentially throw up their cud, and it depends on how much they get, it can kill them. Okay. So only way if you know. When one of them gets out and okay, he's probably ate rhododendron, you can treat them with activated charcoal or something of that nature and try to absorbs that poison. But there's no real antidote you can give them. It's just it really just depends on how you can reduce the amount of absorbed, and if you can catch them soon enough, it's work. So that is a challenge. And another one is just liability. If he gets out in an urban area and they eat somebody else's, even if it's not poisonous, if they get in and destroy or damage somebody else's landscaping, there's that liability of, somebody. I had to do that once. They had to pay for replacing their landscaping, even though they just trimmed it. They think, oh, you destroyed my landscaping. Well, so you have to admit that's another issue. And then there's also just the liability if an animal gets out on the highway, on a road or something, gets hit with a vehicle or it has damage. So there's all kinds of liability issues of an animal getting out in these urban settings. So it's, there's risk to the animal, risk to the business as far as liability goes, and those kinds of things. So don't really want the animals to get out and
you need them doing their job. So why wouldn't this park, Meldrum Park, the city that manages a park, or Metro, for example, not have their own herd of goats and just use it on their properties? Sure. Perhaps hire a local herdsperson or train someone within their staff to do that. Why isn't that practical for them instead of having you as a specialist here?
Sure. Well, there's a couple things. One is that the animals have to be somewhere all the time, and when the conditions over here get really wet, when they get the fall, late fall, winter time, that goats are not very adapted to really wet conditions, and they're not going to do. You can have them out there grazing, but you have to start providing cover and start a lot of other management issues when it's wet. And then you're also going to have somebody that's going to be trimming hooves, and there's a lot of management issues tied with those herd of goats. And I say when the winter hits, they're not as I don't think they forage as well because of the wet conditions, and because they just don't like it as well. And you're trying to figure out where you're gonna keep the animals. In this situation, some of this area, this is a park next to the Willamette River, parts of this area flood, so it would not be conducive to having there during the wintertime.
Interesting. I've been asked if someone could have 2 goats and keep them all year and move them around. Sure. Conservation district, and,
sure.
And you bring out that challenge because those 2 goats aren't as socially busy as the goats that we've been seeing here today. And then there's the issues when the plants aren't growing, and shelter and all those things that a shepherd like yourself has to be
Right.
very well aware of. So it
Yeah.
really is a very special tool and makes an
Right.
expert with all your training and the knowledge of plants. So I think that's a really interesting point. Most people don't really think about rhododendrons and camellias being toxic. They're just beautiful landscape
Right.
plants. So they really are, those are a hazard to the goats. They can make them very ill or even
Even cause death.
death.
Because yeah.
And then other things that just have mild toxins or lesser toxins like the poison oak or the English ivy that's in this setting, they
Sure.
manage really well through absorption in their gut. And the liver of goats is very large relative to their body size, and so they're able to process those toxins more than other animals of similar size. A really large liver.
And one of the things about dealing with a public situation is that, I mean, what it is about, I mean, people always want to feed the goats. I mean, it just, wherever you go, they want to feed them. I mean, it's like instinct. I don't know what it is. It's something about, I got to feed the goats. You got to feed. It's like it's a petting zoo, and it's, you try to explain it's not a petting zoo, and you don't need to feed the goats because, and a lot of those things people don't know. Rhododendrons and azaleas are poisonous, so they'll grab a plant that's outside the pen and feed them to goats. And that was that was probably one of the bigger, the biggest losses of goats I had was somebody was working behind for a homeowner association. They threw some of their clippings from their yard or over the fence because we'll just feed the goats. Well, a lot of it was rhododendrons, azaleas, and like 15 or 16 animals got sick, and I lost 7 of them. So those kind of things are probably the biggest liabilities. The educational opportunity there to make sure that people are aware that these plants there are poisonous plants out there, and you don't need to be feeding them. And another thing is just like you don't want your goats standing all lined up along the fence looking for people to feed them when they're supposed to be working on the inside. So
Right, 'cause the job is
right out there, it's like I can explain. There's two reasons. You don't want to train the goats to stand next to the fence. Also, there's a lot of these plants can be potentially poisonous.
And then in the economic sense, you've lost a real value of your tool.
Mm-hmm.
Do you maintain insurance for situations like that, or work that in? How did you manage that difficult situation?
That's just a business, essentially a business expense. There's not. I thought, well, the landowner might be willing to, the homeowner might be willing to pay part of it, but she said no. And of course, and essentially he was not intending to hurt the animals, so he has no liability on the court side of things because there's no intent to harm animals. It wasn't a malicious intent. So it was a business. It was a business expense essentially losing that tool. So I do carry insurance, but not that kind of insurance, not loss of animal insurance. I carry commercial liability insurance as part of the business because most places want you to have liability insurance just because something happens out here. You get sued, they want to go after your insurance first versus somebody else, versus the cities or something. So they want to have you added as additional insured on your policy, so that they're covered under your policy if something happens when you're on the property.
Like any well-managed business, you have to consider all those possibilities,
Right.
not simply the animals and their
Right. It's just
grazing.
it's just an insurance policy that there's a lot of clients will require that.
So you've been here at this location along the Willamette River in the Portland metro area for about 4 weeks,
About 4 weeks. Yep.
and you'll be around.
About another week.
And then do you have another grazing or browsing job to go to, or will you take the herd home?
Well, this probably might be the last. It looks like it's going to be. There's potential for one more, but it looks like this might be the last one. And then I'll be heading home, getting the goats back home, and then getting ready for the winter. Getting the hay in, getting the goats separated so that they could get the bucks in with the does, and getting them bred here middle part of October. So that process starts, and then I will start. I'm building this herd up, so I'll keep most of the dolings. I'll keep the young dolings.
The
Female, yeah,
animals.
yeah.
Okay.
And then most of the wethers, the males, will be sold and go into the meat market.
Oh, okay.
And that part of
And
it.
is that a local market? Do you have people around you, or do you ship with a more commercial, larger scale meat provider?
Well, right now I've been just selling them combination of different things. Some to just into the livestock market. We've been working on in the process of developing a more direct marketing aspect with the goats. That's a work in progress, and so we're getting closer to getting a situation where we may be able to do some more of that. But right now, majority of the animals are going just more are sold on the hoof. And
So do you have a livestock auction near where
Yeah.
you live?
well, not
And
too
they-
far away.
Okay.
Yeah.
And they accept goats.
Yep.
Yes.
They do on a usually once a month. They have a small animal sale, and so we have done that. And like I say, it's been a combination. Working on, working on developing that alternative market. But
It's changing in
it-
Oregon as well. You know, your home is in the Spokane area, but we have more livestock auction yards that do have particular days that they'll take goats, and those go to particular meat markets. People who want halal prepared meats or other goat, and once in a while you see it on the menu. I know
Right.
more
Starting to see.
fine dining restaurants will have different options, and goat meat is one of those on the menu. So there's definitely a demand. It's small, but it's
Right,
growing
it's
in a very
growing.
specialized market.
Right. And it's mostly an ethnic market.
So as bottle kids, obviously you raise them on an artificial on a milk supplement. Will they eat as well? Do you see a difference in their?
Yeah,
They're-
they get adapted to the forage. Yeah.
Yeah.
They may not get they don't seem to grow as well.
So goats are a good choice for eating woody vegetation, vines and shrubs, if that's the pest plant that you want to get rid of, because that's what they prefer. We call them browsers. They're similar to deer and elk in what they like to eat. And then there are things about their bodies that allow them to eat that kind of vegetation. So we're going to look in this goat kid's mouth, and you see this lower set of teeth. You can rub the gums of a goat and look in there, and you see those little stipply structures? All of those are very thick and allow the goat to cope with thorns and other really spiny vegetation. So they don't get torn or have problems with things like the thorns on plants from the rose family like the Himalayan blackberry. So that structure inside their mouths really helps them. They're like little triangular projections. And then they have the liver that allows them to process the plant toxins. So they're really a great choice. They can be a market animal for their meat, and then because of their particular physiology and physical structures, they can eat these plants that we want to treat and have less of. And this guy's just super friendly.
I really ran into a situation where a client has said that I didn't meet their expectations, because I've tried to be very clear up front that it's not going to take one treatment. And this is the impact. This is what the goats will do is this, and this, and try to be very clear about what the expectations are and what they will do and what they will not do.
Like they won't eat these really large
The canes. The canes will still be
large
there.
trees.
They may bark some trees. They may do some of these other there's some damages or positive depending on the aspect of what you're trying to accomplish, something that the client wants to accomplish. You know, if you got Douglas fir there and you just planted seedlings, it's probably not a good place for goats.
No,
So you're not going to put goats in there.
Not at all.
So
They'll eat them.
yeah, they'll be toast. So you don't want to wipe out some of these new plantings. So those kind of things if you have that, you get that information ahead of time and try to be as clear as possible about.
Do you make sure that's always in writing? Those if you observe that there's a rare plant, of course you wouldn't put your goats in there. You'd wait for a different season. But are there particular points that you make within a contract to ensure that there's a complete understanding?
Yeah, I do put in there. So, like for example, the goats won't eat the canes, and if you're trying to manage blackberries solely with goats, you'll need at least 2 treatments a year for a period of 3 to 4 years. So I put that in there. I usually tell them that. I also reiterate that in the little contract.
So you and I have a lot of experience. We learned about plants. I mean, we started out with our animals, but we realized that our domestic livestock can be part of vegetation management or these other systems, and that we can have an overlap of the ecology and agriculture if we're going to manage our planet.
Right.
People eat,
Sure.
use animal resources, as well as have healthy landscapes that are just for the aesthetic and the biodiversity value. That one thing that I hear people claim who sell their vegetation management services like you do is that if the goats browse in this area, whatever they eat, any seeds or flowers that they consume, anything going out the digestive tract, any of their feces, those seeds will be killed, and we just don't have good data to tell us that this species of plant or that species of plant will be
Sure.
denuded in the tract. In fact, some things sprout better when they pass through the body. of the goats, probably. We know that with birds. So do you see that expectation from anybody that you do contracts with, or hear that claim about the goat's digestive tract sterilizing the seed or damaging it so that it won't sprout?
I've heard that from a state, somebody call it, say, I've heard that, goat, once they eat the seed or whatever, it won't pass this as well. Yeah, they've done some, there's been a little bit of research, but most of it, there's some that will pass through. It's not you're not going to eliminate 100% of it. It's impossible. Only way that I usually try to tell people about that issue is that, okay, if we're not there when they're mature seeds on the ground, if they're eating it when it's flowering or it's still green seed and they're digesting it, then it's not an issue. So I try to make sure if we're dealing with something that may be spread, that we're dealing with it, making sure that we're there on site prior to anything going to seed.